Sitting on a bench after work isn't a crime, but for Paul, it was an arrest. Today on Justice Valley, we see what happens when a hunch replaces the law. Imagine finishing a 10-hour shift, the fluorescent lights of the pharmacy finally flickering off behind you. You're exhausted, sitting on a concrete bench in the cool night air, watching the little car icon on your phone. Your Lyft is only 2 minutes away. You haven't broken a law, you barely moved. But then, a patrol car rolls up. In a matter of seconds, your quiet commute home transforms into a high-stakes confrontation. No. Hello. No. How's your night? Just a demand for ID, and the metallic click of a taser being drawn. This was the reality for 22-year-old Paul, a CVS employee in Edgewater, Florida. 7 minutes after clocking out, he found himself staring down a barrel and AK-9, not because he was a criminal, but because an officer had a hunch. Welcome back to Justice Valley. Today, we're dissecting a case where your right to exist in public meets the hard way, a police ego. Officer Ripion pulls in, not with a question, but with an accusation. He claims Paul was hiding behind a pillar, but Paul's explanation is simple. He was putting on a hoodie and waiting for his ride. In these moments, the law requires an officer to use objective facts to justify a detention. Instead, we see immediate escalation. Ripion doesn't check the store's closing time or ask for a manager. He reaches for his taser. "I work here, sir," Paul pleads, his voice steady despite the red dot potentially dancing on his chest. But for Ripion, the facts are secondary to his authority. When Paul's Lyft finally arrives, his literal ticket home, the officer sends the driver away. He tells the driver Paul doesn't need a ride anymore because he's going to jail. It wasn't about a crime. It was about a young man daring to ask why he was being bothered. To understand why this is a constitutional nightmare, we have to look at the Fourth Amendment. Not every police interaction is a lawful detention. For a Terry stop to be valid, an officer needs specific, objective facts indicating criminal activity, not just a vague hunch or a feeling, because someone is wearing a hoodie at night. In Florida, the law is clear. A pedestrian has no legal obligation to carry a government-issued ID card. Yet, Ripion treated that plastic card like it was gold. He obsessed over it, later twisting the narrative to claim he merely asked Paul to identify himself. There is a massive legal gulf between stating your name and being forced to produce physical documentation under threat of violence. When an officer uses a suspicious person report as a blank check to demand papers from an innocent worker, they aren't protecting the community. They're violating the very Constitution they swore to uphold. The most damning moment of this entire encounter doesn't happen during the struggle. It happens when the other officers arrive. On his own body cam, Ripion admits the truth. He looks at his colleagues and says, "I do believe he works here." In that single sentence, the legal justification for the entire detention evaporates. Under the 11th Circuit ruling in U.S. v. Campbell, a stop may only last as long as necessary to resolve the initial suspicion. The moment Ripion realized Paul was a CVS employee waiting for a ride, the investigation was over. But instead of uncuffing him, Ripion doubled down. He didn't arrest Paul for a crime. He arrested him for resisting an investigation that had already reached its conclusion. He explicitly stated Paul was going to learn the hard way. That isn't law enforcement. It's a punitive use of power against a citizen who refused to be intimidated. As Paul sits in the back of the cruiser, the interrogation continues. This brings us to a critical legal failure: custodial interrogation. When a person is in custody, meaning they are not free to leave, and an officer asks questions designed to elicit incriminating responses, they are required to read the Miranda rights. In this footage, we see Ripion lecturing and questioning Paul about his actions, all while Paul is securely handcuffed and detained. No rights were read. No warnings were given. Ripion was so focused on teaching a lesson that he ignored the fundamental procedural safeguards meant to protect the accused. Under the law, any statements Paul made during this time could be suppressed, rendered inadmissible by a judge. It highlights a recurring theme we see here at Justice Valley. When an officer prioritizes his ego over the rules of criminal procedure, the entire case begins to crumble under the weight of its own illegality. This case exposes a frustrating double standard often found in the just comply mindset. Some will watch this and say Paul should have simply handed over a non-existent ID to avoid the headache. But these are the same individuals who would be the first to scream about their Second Amendment rights if a rifle were seized without cause. You cannot pick and choose which parts of the Bill of Rights matter. We either defend all constitutional protections, or we have none at all. Paul's grandfather was a police captain, proving this isn't about being anti-cop. It's about being pro-accountability. when we allow officers to use the law as a weapon to punish. Contempt of cop. We lose the essence of a free society. Our rights don't end where an officer's fear or ego begins. Freedom can be messy, and at times, it's even scary. Deal with it. This isn't just a story about one bad night in Volusia County. It's a snapshot of a systemic issue that could happen to anyone at the wrong place and the wrong time. Paul's charges are still pending, and his life remains in limbo because he chose to stand on his rights rather than submit to an unlawful demand. We need to make sure this footage doesn't just sit in a digital vault. Transparency is the only real tool we have for accountability. If you believe that 7 minutes on a bench after a long shift shouldn't lead to a jail cell, share this video. Spread it far and wide so the Edgewater Police Department knows the world is watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Justice Valley, and hit that notification bell to stay informed on your rights. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, protect your rights or lose them.